He was a respected district attorney, a man who dedicated his life to justice. But one evening, a simple walk in the park turned into a nightmare. A white cop, fueled by bias and unchecked power, planted drugs on him, thinking he was just another black man to frame. Handcuffed and humiliated, he stayed silent, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth that would shatter everything. What happened next will stun even those who've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. David Lawson, a man of poise and intellect, had spent the week tirelessly arguing cases in court, wielding his sharp mind as both sword and shield. Known for his commanding presence and unwavering commitment to justice, David was a symbol of integrity in the legal system. But today, dressed in a simple hoodie, basketball shorts, and a worn baseball cap, he looked like any other man, trying to find a moment of peace. The weight of his job had driven him to take an unusual detour, a quiet walk through the neighborhood park to clear his head. For once, he allowed himself to blend in, a rare respite from his high-profile life. Meanwhile, Officer Jack Miller patrolled the nearby streets, his boredom mixing with his insatiable need for control. Jack had long been known for profiling black men, a practice whispered about but never challenged. His superiors often turned a blind eye to his tactics, shrugging off complaints as he said, she said, misunderstandings. Today, Jack was agitated. He hadn't made a bust all day and was eager to assert his authority. When Jack spotted David walking along the sidewalk, his suspicion ignited. A black man in a hoodie? That was enough. Just another one, he muttered, his frustration morphing into aggression as he slammed on his brakes and flicked on his police lights. David stopped mid-step, his heartbeat quickening as the patrol car approached. Instinctively, he knew where this was going. Years in the courtroom had familiarized him with officers like Jack, men who abused their badges, hiding prejudice behind thin veils of authority. "Hands where I can see 'em," Jack shouted, his voice sharp and accusatory. He stomped toward David, his hand hovering near his holster. "I'm just walking," David replied evenly, his calm tone masking the storm of emotions brewing inside. Jack didn't care. Roughly patting David down, his sneer deepened when he found nothing. Annoyed, he stepped back and made a show of checking David's pockets. Then, with a furtive glance, Jack's hand moved quickly. A small bag of white powder slipped into David's jacket. David saw it. His stomach dropped, rage simmering beneath his still expression. "Looks like you're carrying something illegal," Jack smirked, holding up the planted evidence. David remained silent, his jaw tight. He knew exactly what had happened. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around David's wrists. "You're under arrest," Jack said smugly, shoving him toward the patrol car. "Let's see how smart you are now, huh?" David's fury burned, but he stayed quiet. For now. At the police station, David Lawson sat quietly in a holding cell, his hands tightly clasped around his knees. The cold, gray walls seemed to close in, but David's face remained calm and expressionless. Years of courtroom battles had taught him patience under pressure. Outside the cell, Officer Jack Miller was practically glowing with pride, puffing up his chest as he bragged to his fellow officers. "I knew something was off about him," Jack boasted to Officer Harris, leaning against his desk. "Guy had that look, you know. Caught him red-handed, drugs right in his pocket." Harris raised an eyebrow, though he didn't challenge Jack. The department had grown used to Jack's so-called busts. Across the bullpen, Lieutenant Rachel Diaz observed the scene with narrowed eyes. A no-nonsense officer committed to cleaning up corruption, Rachel had spent months quietly investigating suspicious behavior in her ranks. When she spotted David sitting behind the bars, something about him struck her as unusual. His composure, his sharp gaze, it wasn't typical for someone in this situation. "You check his ID?" Rachel asked Jack as she approached. Jack shrugged dismissively, his confidence unshaken. "Didn't need to. Guy's guilty as sin. Besides, he looked like trouble." Rachel frowned, her instincts flaring. Something didn't sit right, but she decided to let it play out. For now. Hours later, the station had quieted, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the air. Jack sauntered into the holding area, smirking as he approached David's cell. A fingerprint kit dangled casually from his hand. "Hope you're ready for a nice long stay," Jack jeered. "Let's get this over with." For the first time, David looked up, his eyes locking onto Jack with a gaze as cold as steel. His voice, steady and deliberate, shattered the silence. "I'd like to make my phone call." Jack snorted, tossing the phone toward him. "Yeah? Who are you calling? Your dealer?" David ignored the jab, dialing a number he knew by heart. After a short pause, he spoke into the phone. "This is David Lawson. Get my attorney and the police commissioner. Now." Jack's grin faltered, confusion flashing across his face. "Wait, what did you just say?" David slowly set the phone down and met Jack's stunned gaze. His voice was calm, but razor sharp. "I'm David Lawson, district attorney for this city, and you just planted drugs on me." Jack froze, the color draining from his face as realization struck like a blow. The room fell deathly silent, and for the first time that day, Jack Miller was speechless. Within an hour, the police station buzzed with tension. Senior officials arrived, including Rachel Diaz and the police commissioner, alongside David's high-powered attorney. Officer Jack Miller, now pale as a ghost, began to stammer excuses. "It's a mistake. He had the drugs. He's lying," Jack yelled. But no one was buying it. Rachel Diaz stepped forward, addressing Jack directly. "We'll be reviewing your body cam footage. I sure hope there's nothing suspicious on it, Officer Miller." David stood up, his posture commanding, as his attorney handed over papers. "I'll be pressing charges for false arrest, misconduct, and planting evidence. And believe me, I'll make sure this entire department is reviewed for corruption." Jack started sweating, his bluster collapsing under the weight of the situation. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," David interrupted coldly. "You thought you could railroad a random black man and get away with it. But this time, you picked the wrong one." The commissioner turned to Jack, his tone sharp. "Miller, you're suspended pending investigation. I'll have internal affairs on this first thing tomorrow." As Jack was escorted from the room, his face a mix of fury and fear, David exhaled, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "How many others have you done this to?" he asked quietly, though Jack had no answer. Days later, David held a press conference, standing firm before a crowd of reporters. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every innocent person targeted by officers who abuse their power. Systemic racism in law enforcement is not a bad apple problem. It's a system that shields people like Officer Miller." The incident went viral, sparking outrage and calls for reform. Jack Miller's body cam footage confirmed the planted evidence, and he was quickly fired and arrested for misconduct and tampering with evidence. Further investigations revealed a pattern of abuse, uncovering other victims who finally found justice. Lieutenant Rachel Diaz, now tasked with cleaning house, personally thanked David. "Your case has been a wake-up call for this department," she admitted. "We're finally rooting out the corruption." David nodded, though his face was grave. "This is just the start. There's still work to be done." As he left the courthouse, David stopped to speak to a group of young activists holding signs against police injustice. One teenager, wide-eyed and inspired, asked, "Mr. Lawson, how did you stay so calm when they arrested you?" David smiled faintly, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. Because I knew who I was, and I knew the truth would win. Don't ever let anyone silence you. Fight for what's right, no matter the cost. The boy nodded, his face lighting up with determination. David stood watching the crowd. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, he knew he'd made a difference.